a clinical phytotherapist. Phytotherapy is the European term for the use of herbs in medical practice. Phyto from the Greek word for plant. And in a way, a phytotherapist is different to a herbalist. A herbalist is someone who has a rapport and an understanding of the plant. Now, being at home with plants and knowing how to use them doesn't tell you anything about human beings and how human health issues warrant the use of herbs. So the phytotherapy training is really a medical training that then uses plants as the materia medica. So in a way, a phytotherapist in England would be the equivalent of a naturopath in the US who has focused purely on the use of herbs as their technique. We never went through the suppression of the practice of herbal medicine in Britain that happened here in the 20s following the Flexner Report. So I was able to do a 4-year postgraduate medical training in herbal medicine with the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. Was in practice in Wales for 18 years, and then moved to America about 10 years ago. Because of legal issues, laws which, if I was a citizen, I'd really work at changing, but you know, I'm not a citizen, so I'm going to keep quiet. Because of those laws, I'm not in practice in this country, but I train practitioners. Especially I train MDs and nurse practitioners at the moment. There is an incredible sea change going on in attitudes to the use of plants in orthodox medicine. Now, I'm very definitely not in the mainstream, but I seem to be able to bridge the various worldviews in herbalism so that the different sides of the issues can be heard by different people. Well, there are many definitions of a herb, and actually at one point I went through all the various disciplines looking for their definitions of herbs. And if you look at a botany book or an ecology book or a cookery book, the definitions are all entirely different. So I've come to a more philosophical conclusion about the definition of a herb. I would say a herb is any plant. A herb is something, is a botanical something that has a role to play in human health care. Now, there is the World Health Organization definition of health, which is the one that I use, and that provides an ecological basis. Let me tell you the definition. Their definition, which by the way will be the US government's definition, even though they probably don't know it because they're signatories. Health is more than the absence of disease. It's an active state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being. They came up with that in 1947. I think if they were doing it now, they would add environmental well-being, and personally I would add spiritual well-being. So any plant which is playing a role in the ecology of our planet, which is helping, you know, ecological health, and by definition, if it's alive, it's doing that, that makes it part of our personal health care, because we cannot be healthy as a species if the environment isn't. So all plants are medicinal plants on a planetary scale. All plants are herbs. There are just some that we use medicinally, some that we use for eating and drinking, and some we use for, beautiful flower displays, and all of them are healthy. So I've got a very, very, very broad definition. That would sort of embrace over 500,000 plant species, according to the botanists. So the next issue is, how do you select the ones out of that list that you're going to use? If you read the pharmacy and history of medicine books, they sort of imply the origins of herbalism are crazed Paleolithic Stone Age men dying with some plants and then learning by their mistakes what worked. And I don't accept that at all. I think a use of medicinal plants or use of plants in healing is not something that started, it's something that just is. Animals use them. There's now a branch of zoology called zoopharmacology. No, sorry, zoopharmacognosy. People have been watching gorillas and other higher primates searching out specific medicinal plants depending on their illnesses. So I think it's something that is a given, as a given for any species that is part of the ecology of the planet. It's just our culture has forgotten that we have that instinctual root. Some of the oldest burial sites in Europe, Paleolithic burial sites, are actually thought of as sites of herbalists, because there's one in southern Poland where they found the skeleton, and around it were piles of very old, very dried medicinal plants. Not random, they were aligned. So I don't think we know what the roots are. You can look at the origins of different traditions, but I think humanity's use of herbs goes way back before any tradition developed. So if anything is orthodox medicine and traditional medicine, it's going to be herbalism. Every culture, everywhere in the world, at every historical point in time, has used herbs, including modern pharmacological medicine. That question is only askable because for the last 40, 50 years, the use of herbs by what is now called orthodox medicine has lessened. In the last century, the primary medicines used by all branches of medicine were herbs. So you had the regular doctors who are now orthodox medicine. They were using herbs. The people who are now the herbalists would have been part of the eclectic tradition in the last century, and they were using herbs. The difference was the way we use the herbs. So the pharmacopoeias of modern medicine still have herbs in them. And if you go back to books written just before or just after the First World War, they were 90% herbal. So the use of herbs is normal, it's mainstream. The belief system and the philosophical system with which they're used, and the philosophical approach to health and wholeness, that's what really is the difference. And there it really depends what tradition you look at. What 10 years ago was thought of as marginal fringe Chinese medicine is 5,000 years old. European phytotherapy is about 2,000 years old, has changed and developed with the development of the culture. In this country, when European physicians came over, eventually there was a mixing and matching between the clinical skills of the day with the folk medicine of the people who were immigrating, and a little bit of wisdom that was gained from the Native Americans when Europeans were willing to ask them. So a very unique blend happened in this country, so that by the end of the last century, there was a school of herbal physicians who were MDs, called eclectic physicians, who were way in advance of anything being done in the West today in terms of phytotherapy. Most European professional herbalists relate to the writings of the eclectic physicians. Their medical theory was 19th century, but their understanding of herbs and holistic approaches, even though they didn't use those terms, is so relevant for today. Unfortunately, they were the schools that were suppressed in the 20s. They were the very successful competition to the AMA. And as such, when the drug companies started making their massive profits in between the First and Second World War, they were the first to go. And we're just rediscovering their writings. Well, the writings were never got rid of. It's just that we're just remembering they did those writings. Holism is a context. A lot of people think of herbs as holistic, and they're not. No thing can be holistic. Holism is a paradigm that looks at the whole of a system, whatever the system is. You can be a holistic ecologist, or you can be a reductionist ecologist. The same with medicine. The opposite of holism is reductionism. Reductionist approaches analyze everything and try and understand things from their smallest components. Holism tries to comprehend a system by understanding its processes and how it fits into a bigger system. Of course you need both approaches in practice. Taking a cup of herb tea or a tincture or a capsule, there's nothing holistic about that. That's just, it's a tincture, it's brown, foul tasting stuff. That's not holistic. That is herbal. You can use herbs in a very reductionist way. You can use herbs simply to treat a symptom or a disease name. To use herbs holistically, you need to be trained in some sort of therapeutic philosophy that gives you a broader context to view the whole person and their specific health care complaints. So in that context, in the hands of someone who is trained in diagnosis that leads to holistic implications, herbs are very, very effective. But just using herbs doesn't make that holistic medicine any more than using a prescription medication means that you're using competent modern medicine. You may just have a bad prescription. There's a big difference between the consciousness of this and the material of phytotherapy. As a generalization, you can say that fresh plants are always more therapeutically effective than dried or preserved plants. There are some exceptions. There are some herbs which are slightly toxic, so you always need to look it up first. But on the whole, fresh plants are going to be best. So growing them at home, either in a garden or even in a window box. People with migraine, for example, if they're going to be using feverfew, which works very well with most migraine patients, they shouldn't become dependent on products. They should grow their own, and it's very simple to do. A herb gardener. To be a herb gardener, you should do it because you love growing herbs, which is why I'm not a herb gardener. I'm not very good at it. Find out what herbs are going to be most appropriate for your personal health issues, and then get one of the herb gardening books and find which of those are the easiest to grow. And need least water and least attention. Make life as easy as possible. And then grow the ones that are appropriate for daily tonic use as a preventative, so that there's no concern about toxicity. Ones that you would need in largest quantities, which would be the daily ones. You're growing yourself, so there's no cost. Money should never be an issue in herbalism. Herbalism is the people's medicine. We don't have to pay the utilities for the sun to shine so the plants grow. So as far as possible, I encourage people to grow their own. I used to encourage people to collect their own, but I don't anymore. In fact, I never collect my own anymore. I think there are too many people on the planet to start off with, and now there are too many people turning to herbalism. So if we all start wildcrafting, which is going out and picking our own, even if we do it really carefully, we're going to be a major environmental pressure. It's now illegal for any flower to be picked from the wild in Britain because there are too many people. So I don't encourage wildcrafting. Let's grow our own. There's a suggestion that I made to the herb industry. In fact, I do it every time they listen to me. Why don't the individual 1 ounce bottles of tincture come with the seeds of the plant the tincture is made of? Just a little small tube of them. And even if people don't plant them, they can always feed them to the birds. And even if they don't do that, there is the educational insight that is given, that yes, these are natural, come from natural products. So if people had the seeds with the tincture, then they are not going to be dependent on the manufacturers. Those 1 ounce bottles, which cost between $7 to $10, depending on the product line, they're vastly overpriced, unbelievably overpriced. And the dosages on them, the 15 to 30 drop 3 times a day, they're nowhere near the right dosage. If you put the real dose on the label, which would be a teaspoonful of nettles, say 3 times a day, that makes a $10 bottle of tincture a day and a half's worth of medicine. So nobody would buy them. To really use the herbs well, therapeutically and nutritionally, you should be growing them so money isn't an issue. somebody somewhere is making a vast amount of profit from herbal products, and it's not the herbalists, it's who knows who. Herbal medicine, in a way, is the North American term for what we describe as phytotherapy in Europe. It's using herbs in the practice of medicine, either by a skilled trained practitioner or by somebody with no training who has been told about a health issue and they're using a herb for that health issue. Chinese medicine is, the branch of it that uses herbs is herbal medicine. Phytotherapy is herbal medicine. Ayurvedic medicine, the part that uses herbs, is herbal medicine. Phytotherapy would be the biomedically orientated Western form of using herbs. You may have come across the term Chinese herbs. That leads to real misunderstandings. There isn't such a thing as a Chinese herb in the way it's understood in this country. There are herbs used in Chinese medicine. So burdock is used in Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Herbs that grow in China are used in Chinese medicine. That doesn't make them Chinese herbs because they can grow in this country and can be used in Western medicine. So what we share in common is the use of plants in the approach to healing. Now, herbal medicines are any plant product used to achieve a therapeutic outcome. And they can either be stuff you pick from your garden, fruits and vegetables, stuff you buy in a herb store, or the prescriptions. Approximately 25% of prescription medications in the current US pharmacopoeia are herbal, either purely herbal or herbal very recently. I mean, they were extracted from plants. And if you take a historical perspective, about 70% of what's in the pharmacopoeia have their roots in plants. Aspirin, which is purely synthesized, was developed from salicylates, which came from willow bark and meadowsweet. So I would say that aspirin would fit in the 70% of things which come from plants. In Germany, there's this whole category called phytopharmaceuticals. You may not know this, but MDs in Germany have to do 2 solid semesters and then clinical work in the use of phytotherapy before they can become MDs. So primary healthcare, first line of what the MD in Germany would do, would be what I would do. It's not prescription medications and surgery. They're just kept for when they're needed. So what they prescribe looks just like what an MD would prescribe here. It's blister packs with well-made tablets in boxes, and it's just that what's inside the tablet is herbal. So they don't look like herbs, but it's just as much herbal medicine as eating a good salad. In practice, yes. Yeah. Well, if you think about Native American use of herbs in medicine, that's predefined by the Native American take on what medicine is. And it's very different to what we've been brought up to assume reductionist medicine is like car mechanics for the body. And that leads to a very limited take on what you use herbs for, because you won't use herbs for things you've never thought of, like prevention and toning effects. Chinese herbal medicine is very different in practice to orthodox Western herbal medicine, simply because they have a very holistic worldview. So when an MD uses herbs, they use them the way they use drugs, in a very limited but focused and successful way to remove symptoms and stop disease processes, or if it goes wrong, start disease processes. Western herbal medicine, practiced by people like myself, are trying to use herbs in a holistic perspective that is a Western holistic perspective, as opposed to an Oriental holistic perspective. I choose to be in the Western one because I don't understand Chinese medicine. That's an acknowledgement of my limitations. It's a very effective system, but I'm a Westerner. The herbs don't come with an instruction manual. It's the philosophy that we're born into and study that tells us how to use them. So the various herbal medicines of the world share the fact they're using herbs, and that's about all they share. you can get very creative here. You can take them by mouth. Well, the issue is one of making the therapeutic effects of the herbs bioavailable. So it depends what you're using and how you're using it. So rather than getting into all the theory, we'll just go over some of the ways. Anything that makes the herb available in the digestive system will tend to work. So you can eat them. You know, eating a salad is using herbs. Sometimes, though, you need to make the constituents more available to the lining. So then you can either make a tea, you know, decoction or an infusion, or use a alcohol water extract or a glycerin water extract. They've all got their strong points and their weak points. But if a herb has volatile oils, things that evaporate, you can use a steam inhalation. You can take them in via the nose and the sinuses. You can use suppositories. In France, herbalists tend to use suppositories far more than in this country or in England. In fact, everything that's available in tincture in the herb stores there is also available in suppository. And in fact, using a suppository is more effective because it's absorbed directly into the bloodstream rather than through the stomach. You can apply them to the skin. You can make poultices and fermentations and compresses. But then you can get into some subtler forms. I would also say that visually they can be effective. Not doctrine of signatures stuff, but the beauty of a flower, the beauty of the green in nature is also therapeutic. So really any way in which you can get the herb into your energy field, not just your pharmacology, but the subtler stuff as well, in a way that has no toxicity associated with it, is going to be a valid way of doing it. I just had to make another comment about the herb industry, I'm afraid. Some of the companies are starting to do advertising that implies their technique is the most effective one, like freeze drying, which is a very good extraction technique. If you read those ads, it makes it sound like before freeze drying, herbs didn't work. It's nonsense. The modern drug industry and herbal pharmaceutical industry developed because people have been surviving and coping with health issues for millions of years using herbs. If it needed freeze drying before we could find effective herbal medications, the species wouldn't have evolved this far. So if someone tries to market me something as a miracle breakthrough improvement in herbalism, I go the other direction. I don't think there are any herbal miracles, and there are no breakthroughs, because herbs are non-technological. You can have a breakthrough in technology. You can't have a breakthrough in ecological evolution. The herbs are there, and we've evolved with them. If anything, the technology of the products may be compromising some of the therapeutic effects. There's Native American herbalism, which, even though it's definitely not Chinese medicine, it has a lot of correlations with it in terms of the medicine wheel and those sorts of issues. Traditional Welsh medicine, even though it's no longer practiced, would fit into the holistic approaches of what we tend to see always coming from the East. So really I see the difference between reductionist herbal medicine, which is really modern orthodox medicine in the West using herbs, and holistic, spiritually orientated approaches to medicine, which come from the East and Africa and South America and the Native Americans, and increasingly from the people in Western culture who have paid their dues and have rejected the belief system we're educated in and are creating a new one. So the Western approaches, thing I just said we shouldn't be doing, the reductionist approaches are very effective, very, very effective at treating life-threatening, rapidly developing acute emergency illnesses. Herbalism within that context becomes very effective at treating chronic degenerative illness, and also for prevention and maintenance of health. but that's still a limited approach. To actually move to health, because remember that definition from WHO, health is more than the absence of illness. Just preventing illness or curing illness is not making you healthy. So there needs to be a holistic perception of what a healthy whole human being is before you can help someone move towards it. So the insight to us in the West from TCM, from Ayurveda, from Unani medicine in Islam, from Kampo in Japan, is that their healing approaches are part of a spiritual worldview. TCM is a small component of Confucian and Taoist philosophy. Ayurveda is part of the Upanishads. What is allopathic medicine part of? If it is part of a spirituality, it's a very constipated spirituality. So being holistic in the West means doing a lot of work as a practitioner other than learning the skills of your practice. You need to have a way of looking at wholeness, and that doesn't come from the medicine. It doesn't come spontaneously from our upbringing. So I think that's why so many herbalists, once they touch into what I've just been talking about, tend to orientate towards Chinese or Ayurvedic herbalism or Native American herbalism. The reason I haven't, the positive reason, the negative reason is that I don't understand it, their approaches. That's my limitation. The positive reason is I think there's definitely a role to play on the part of the herbal community in what's being called the paradigm shift, the retooling of the Western world view, so it becomes one that opens doors and leads towards more in the holistic sense, rather than the reductionist, planet-raping approach that we're all trying to heal at the moment. So to be holistic as a Western herbalist means creating your own holism, because there's no book. You can't buy a Western equivalent of the Yellow Emperor, which is one of the ancient books of TCM. So it's a lot, in some ways, it's more of a challenge to be a holistic herbalist in the Western context, because you have to think about it, and you have to think about yourself, and you have to think about how everything fits into whole issues. You've got to be, if anything, more intellectual to be a TCM practitioner, because you have to learn so much. You have to comprehend the patterns. They wouldn't see it as intellectualism, though, but holism is a science in China. It's not New Age, whatever. It's a really highly focused science. It's just very different to Western science. They're different challenges than the ones I'm talking about. I'm not meaning we've all got to meditate with our crystals in the morning to be holistic, but we have to challenge ourselves. We have to make ourselves holistic. So it really is physician heal thyself on a very profound level. I suspect that somewhere in the early part of the next century, the book on the Western conceptual holism is going to be written, and then we can relax. But now, to act as a holistic Western herbalist means daily challenging yourself and being constantly uncomfortable, because all the constipation of reductionism is conditioned into us. And one way to overcome it is to step out of it and become a TCM practitioner or an Ayurvedic practitioner. I'm too much of a revolutionary to do that. I want to change it. And it's not just myself and other herbalists doing that. We're a small part of a massive movement that's underway. There is definitely a role in the ideal future, which of course will never exist, but in the one that I use as a sort of lodestone, there is definitely a role for the trained practitioner. There's only so far you can go with self-reliance and self-help. When there is an overt medical condition in play, there are complications. There are issues that arise that there is no way that even a brilliantly self-educated person can know about. I'm not suggesting that we should have a herbal priesthood the way MDs have sort of turned into a cultural elite. That would be the death knell of herbalism. But there is the role for someone who has gone through the years of training to do diagnosis appropriately. The challenge in the US is that it's very difficult to get that sort of training. 10 years ago, it was just about impossible. Now, that's changed. There are some avenues for education which have opened up. And, you know, I'm very involved with many of the schools. I'm visiting faculty at lots of them. But it's not easy to find them. And if somebody wants to do this and they're at school and they ask their careers advisor and tell them you want to be a herbalist, can you imagine what the response will be from the teacher? So it's relatively straightforward now to learn the skills of competent herbalism, either from books or from teachers. It's still a challenge to learn the skills of herbal medical practice. Now, how you would find someone with those skills, you have to be very, very careful. Just because somebody says that they're a practitioner of herbal medicine doesn't mean a thing. Just like there is a role for the FDA to protect from fraudulent product claims, there is a role for something, and I really don't know what, when it comes to helping a concerned person find someone who won't hurt them. Just because they know about herbs doesn't mean they won't mess up because they don't know about healthcare. So I would always, if you want a herbalist, I would always refer to the members list of the professional body called the American Herbalist Guild, which was set up about 6-7 years ago now, to provide a voice for skilled, knowledgeable, professional herbalists, some of whom are practitioners, some aren't. But people who are members of the Institute, the Institute is the English equivalent, that's why I just came up with that name. Members of the Guild are good, they're safe. If they say they're a practitioner, then through peer review, because you can't just join the Guild, it's peer review entry, you know that skilled herbal practitioners agree that this person knows their stuff, even if they don't know their stuff with a degree after their name. Because where do you get a degree in herbalism in this country? The M.H. degree, which is after some people's name, doesn't mean anything. Anybody could put that after their name. It's not a license, it's not a recognized diploma, and it actually doesn't mean anything. The one after my name in this country doesn't mean anything because it's not accredited. The WHO accredit it, but here it sort of defines quack because the laws are set up to see herbalism equaling quackery. There is a unique difference between the National Institute type herbalist in Britain. In Britain, the professional body is called the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. It's been going since 1860, and one of the Queen's doctors is a member, and it always sounds good, but the Queen has 25 doctors, so it doesn't mean all that much. The difference between those, my sort of herbalist from England, and the really good US herbalists is, in Britain we were never suppressed, so we explored modern medicine as it developed. So British herbalists are solidly based in clinical medical practice. The American herbalists, because of the legal oppression, and it's all the law's fault, they didn't have that avenue open to them. So what has developed over here is incredibly skilled and knowledgeable and insightful plant-based herbalism. They make the best herbal products, level ones from Germany. They have the best rapport with the wild plant of any herbal group that I've experienced. I wouldn't say that British clinical herbalists love their herbs. It's a non-concept. Whereas in this country, good herbalists are herb lovers. We do hug trees. We do talk to our plants, not because we're crazy, though that's probably the case as well, but because it's part of the heart, whole body openness to a relationship with plants, which was forced on herbalists because they couldn't become skilled professionals. So they became incredibly skilled herbalists. Now that's changing. Now there's a marriage of the two going on. It's a very positive time. In Australia, on the other hand, the way herbalism has developed over the last 20, 30 years there, they have the best of both. And I actually feel that in terms of phytotherapy, the best phytotherapy in the world goes on in Australia and to a lesser extent New Zealand at the moment. My colleagues in England would freak out, but I think it's true. There's positive reasons and negative reasons. The positive reason would be competent treatment. You wouldn't just be limited to treating the disease name. A good trained herbalist can achieve things that we're always amazed of. I mean, it's not the skill of the herbalist that makes the herbs sometimes miraculous in practice. It's just we know how to open the door for that to happen. And herbs can be dramatically effective. They're not miracle cures. We only think of them as miracle cures because we've forgotten that that stuff can happen. So you're more likely to get that sort of depth of competency from a clinician. But it's not really a negative reason, it's more a avoidance of negative reason. You're going to have an experience that will be safe, as opposed to mistreatment, oh, I don't mean personal mistreatment, but misselection of herbs. So either you're not treating something that needs treating so it might get worse, or you treat it inappropriately and something else happens, or you get just treated very badly. Inappropriately, I should say. Not all cancers are down to parasites, which is one of the latest totally erroneous things which is going on. People with certain cancers who use the herbs suggested for this parasite treatment are going to damage themselves. Now, no competent herbalist is going to say anything like that. Some of the FDA concerns and other governmental concerns about using toxic herbs, using herbs and treatments that where the herbs aren't dangerous, but the lack of treatment for the condition is dangerous, I think they're valid concerns. That doesn't mean ban herbalism. It means stop herbal medical schools so that there can be skilled practitioners around. If a person has meaningful health concerns, real health concerns, ideally they should see a skilled practitioner. This country is too big. You can do that in Europe. You can do that in Australia. You can start to do that in Canada. But it's a luck of the draw in the US whether there is a skilled practitioner in your state, let alone in your county or your city. Some parts of the country there's lots of them, other parts there are none. So we're still in transition there. There are two answers to that depending on the time scale. So let's start with the short term, the immediate future and say the next 10 years. I think the future is very, very positive, very positive. Regardless if the future is positive for the herb industry. There I think they won't be around for much longer because the multinational drug companies are now moving in. They're going to be outcompeted. But that's neither here nor there. Herbs provide a potentially very relevant, very affordable bridge between the very low-key preventive techniques of good diet and appropriate lifestyle and the invasive, potentially dangerous techniques of modern drug and surgery-based medicine. They're not just a bridge, so we've got gentle medicine for places where the strong drugs aren't appropriate. They can also be used preventatively, minimizing the need for the strong drugs. And I teach courses now specifically for MDs, I'm finding that family practitioners and certain specialists, certain areas of speciality, they're really starting to explore the use of herbs, because a good doctor has got no vested interest in drugs. They have a vested interest in helping their patient. So there's a move amongst the front-line troops, so to speak, the MDs and the nurse practitioners, the family practitioners and the nurse practitioners, to introduce herbs into their protocols. That's a very, very good sign. Another way in which the herbs have a role is being used in conjunction with other techniques, a range of different techniques. Herbalism would make chiropractic a lot more effective. It doesn't replace any of the manipulative techniques, but it can do things to augment the physical techniques, muscle relaxations, anti-inflammatories without using the drugs. In orthodox medicine, you can use herbs, if there's knowledge there, you can use herbs to minimize the risk of side effects, unwanted effects, minimize long-term damage, and maybe even avoid the need for certain drugs. The issue here is one of skill and knowledge. These are not bodies of knowledge that come from the herbal traditions, how to use the herbs with the drugs, and it's not a body of knowledge that comes from pharmacology, because they don't look at the pharmacological interactions between herbs and a drug. These are guidelines which are coming from the herbal practitioners and the MDs who use herbs within the English and speaking world and Europe. So, used well, I actually think that herbs can be a lifesaver for the drug industry. There is a move away from using prescription drugs as much because people are worried about them. They can use herbs to minimize those worries. This is what the drug companies are really starting to get. So in terms of herbs, there's a definite role, and it's a very strong role. In terms of herbal medicine, this all depends on what Clinton does, what the next president does, and what happens on television, because the general public don't have the knowledge to make the decisions. How they're going to get the knowledge depends on how much we're filtered out. So I think herbal medicine, especially phytotherapy, can be a major banner, flag waver for complementary medicine. Herbalism is not an alternative medicine. It's an inappropriate term in general. Herbalism is not alternative to dentistry. That's just silly. We all complement. All the modalities have got strong points and weak points. If the insights of complementarity are not embraced by the legislators, what's going to happen is the professional elites are going to slip into major competition like they did at the end of the last century when the medical laws were established. And people are going to be defending their profit margins and their professional auras. If that happens, then herbalism is going to just go out the window, because we always are. Historically, it's always the herbalists that everyone turns on, because we're the most grassroots. However, I think now with the science that is justifying our claims, with the licensed practitioners who really know what we're talking about and always turn to us because they know we know more than they do in our field, I think the history won't be repeated this time, as long as we can shut up the herb industry. But I won't go on about that anymore. So short term, this is a really exciting time to be in herbalism. Throughout the Western world, herbalism's time has come. There are no leaders, there are no promotional advertising campaigns. The flowering, the herb renaissance, which is what it's being called, it's literally a grassroots movement. It's a very, very special situation that's going on. But if we look at a medium term perspective, then the whole context changes. And this is where my environmentalist background is going to come in. I ran for the Green Party in '83 in England, and luckily didn't get elected. It would have been hell if I was. The petroleum runs out, according to UNESCO, in 15 to 20 years. The current rates of consumption, because they keep going up, and there's nowhere left to discover more petroleum. Already the cost of products made from petroleum is going up. The cost of gas in the US is kept artificially low. In Europe, it's around about $5 a gallon. Here, it's just a joke, and when people complain, they don't know how lucky they are. Most of the prescription pharmaceuticals are manufactured from petroleum. Very soon, in fact, this is already starting, the cost of prescription products is going up, not because of any other reason other than it's the end of non-renewable petroleum resources. Doesn't matter how much in denial this culture is, we're using it all up, which means 20 years from now there won't be pharmacies for the doctors to prescribe because the raw materials won't be there. Very soon, even if you get a prescription, you won't be able to afford it unless you're rich. And already in the US, a vast number of people can't even afford insurance. So I see the whole cultural context as at some point not far ahead, at which point herbal medicine becomes the only readily available form of materia medica for the doctors to use, for the herbalists to use. And you don't have to use stuff made by the herb industry. You just need to find somebody in your county who knows what abundant local plants have what products, and that's what American herbalists are really good at. So in the short term, is the future very bright for herbalism, because the future is not bright for the system. Not just a bright future, we're actually, I think, the only future that material-based medicine has. I mean, you don't need products to be a chiropractor or an acupuncturist. If you prescribe metabolically based medicine, which is going to help things adjust themselves in the body, they're going to be stuck with herbs. And luckily, herbs work. And luckily, there are some very skilled people around who are going to be able to help. So even if the FDA and whatever other fascist organization wants to really control herbs in the next 5 years, and we're suppressed again, wait a bit, and the only people who know about that stuff. Used to be every pharmacy school had a department of pharmacognosy, which is the academic study of the materia medica, of our dried herbs. There's only 2 left. They thought it had died out. If somebody wants to get a well-paying job, really sought-after role, if you can get a training of a pharmacognosist, they're like gold dust. Every herb company wants to employ them. The FDA need them. It's just all the schools closed down because it was old-fashioned. This was in the 60s. And now there are, a few aging, very knowledgeable, but very aging pharmacognosists left. The system made a very, very big mistake, and they're now seeing it. Just they're not seeing the real mistakes they've made. Luckily, herbalism is in place. Every town I've been to in the US, and the only states I haven't been to are North and South Dakota. I've taught in every other state. Every town has got herbalists, and every county has at least one good herb farm to supply. So that initially, if what I'm projecting towards, if that does happen, they're going to have to expand their growing facilities rapidly. But it's as though a sort of green alternative FEMA, the Federal Emergency Response people, something had been planned. We're in place, we're ready. The transition and the collapse is not going to be as traumatic as it need be because the herbalists are there. Not the herb companies, the herbalists. So I have to admit, I'm really looking forward to that because. So because of that cultural, social, planetary change that's coming, the other side of that, the future is incredibly bright for herbs. Before that, it all depends what mood the legislators are in. But that doesn't really affect people's personal health care. You can always look after your family with herbs. It's got nothing to do with the powers that be. And as people move away from drugs or minimize their use of drugs because of cost or because of concerns about side effects, the reason initially they turn to herbs because they're cheaper, no side effects, maybe. But they stay with herbs because they work. It's not placebo effect, it's not wishful thinking. It's efficacious ecological medicine. So for once I made the right decision in my life. I chose to be a herbalist, and when I made that decision, which was 75, it was a pretty obscure career path. It was sort of locking me into being outside of the mainstream. But those of us who made that choice in the 70s, who are now the primary teachers and authors, most of whom were hippies in the 70s. It's no coincidence it was called flower power. We've learned and we've experienced and we've really paid our dues, and we're in the right place at the right time, not as leaders but as resources. Even if we weren't here, there would still be a massive herb renaissance, because it's almost as though herbs are calling people to them. A number of times I have people in classes who are beginners, but they've told me that they had a dream about a herb, or they just knew they had to get into it. Something from the inside that's saying, do this. And that voice doesn't leave you alone. Once that voice gets your ear, on the whole, it gives people a really hard time until we start listening. And now people are listening. I actually saw an ad on television when I was on the road recently for ginseng products and milk thistle products on one of the, it wasn't some obscure cable station, it was one of the networks. It was primetime television. If herbs are now in primetime advertising, we're mainstream, which is one of the dangers, becoming mainstream. Herbalists are not mainstream.